Hi everyone, thanks for watching. I'm Lauren from Guthrie and Ganny, and in this video I'm going to be sharing with you some ideas for seam finishes and fastenings on fabrics that are thicker or a little bit bulkier. So in my shop at the moment we have got a gorgeous selection of really lovely fur-backed fabrics and then some lovely knitted fabrics as well. And I'm going to show you what some of the options are for finishing off those seam allowances, and then also doing buttonholes or snaps. I've been getting a lot of questions about this, so I've done lots of different experiments. I've got loads of little samples to share with you on what the different options are and what they look like. So hopefully it will give you some really nice ideas for sewing with these fabrics too. I have rounded everything up in a blog post that goes with this video, and the link to that is in the description, so do head over to that where you will find links to buy all the fabrics, lots of pattern suggestions as well. So if you are liking the look of them and you're feeling a bit more confident about sewing them after you've watched the video, then you can put together some pattern and fabric inspiration on the blog post, so do head over to that to check it out. So the main fabric that I'm going to be focusing on is the fur-backed fabric. We've got 4 different types of fur-backed fabric in at the moment. 2 are cord, so one is like a variated cord like this, so the cord sort of stripes or whales as they're called. Some are thicker and some are thinner, and then in the back is this gorgeous furry fabric. The other one is the bubble cord, so it is this one here. It comes in a few colours as well, and it's not got a nap, slightly different from normal cord, and it sort of feels the same no matter what way you brush it. It's just got a bit more texture to it. Again, it's got that lovely fluffy fur fabric on the back, and then we've got these gorgeous wool mixed plaid ones, come in a lovely festive green, a festive red, and then a nice classic cozy navy one as well, and they've got a gorgeous grey fur back on that's very, very thick and luxurious, so cozy. And then the final one that we have got as well is a selection of denim ones too. So we've got 3 different shades of denim, and they have all got a sort of fleecy kind of teddy fluffy backing to them as well. So they're effectively like 2 layers of fabric that are kind of bonded together. So it does make them thicker. It's kind of like they come lined already as well. So it's really good if you want to make a garment and then it's just like the lining's there already. They do make absolutely gorgeous garments. At the moment, you've seen like the little sort of waistcoats or kind of gilets or vests are very on trend. There's lots of different patterns that are that sort of style, and these types of fabrics would be really good for that. Or just kind of like simple jackets, more sort of oversized jackets, would look really nice in this kind of thing as well. And then the other fabric I'm going to talk about is the marled knitted fabric, and this is it kind of looks like it's been sort of knitted on knitting needles, and effectively you could make a garment that kind of looked like it had been hand knitted, but it's not, it's just sewn. And they've got quite a loose sort of knitted texture to them, and I've been getting a lot of questions about sewing and doing buttonholes on these as well, so I'll pop some timestamp chapters on this video, and if you're more interested in this type of fabric you can just jump straight ahead to that section. So if we talk about seam finishes first of all, and because I've done lots of different experiments on the different options, some of them I'm kind of like, don't do this, but I'll explain to you why. Now, if you've got an overlocker, then that is definitely one option that you can do. So I did a test where I did overlocking the seam allowances together and then also overlocking the seams when they're then pressed open. I would say overlocking them together, I personally think it makes it too bulky. I wouldn't recommend doing this. I think it's just because it's thick fabric anyway, and then you're ending up with like effectively 3 layers of fabric on top of each other, if they're pushed to the same side, and then if you've got any like turnings or hems or anything, it just gets very bulky on one side. So I would suggest not doing that overlocking together, because I just think it's too bulky and thick. I would suggest overlocking and pressing them open, but what I found is that it's much easier to overlock it before you sew the seam. So on the pink one here, I did one side where I overlocked it before I stitched the 2 bits together, and then I did one where I overlocked it afterwards, and basically it's just much harder for the overlocker to feed it through. So like the stitching was a bit more uneven, like the threads aren't quite right on the edge of it, it's just not as neat basically. So definitely try to overlock before you sew the seams as much as you can if you're going to do that method. But otherwise I think it works out well. It spreads the bulk out nice and easily. You know, I think it looks good. If you wanted to, you could top stitch them down as well. The fabric is synthetic, so it's not, you know, it's not going to take a crease like a wool fabric would, for example. So if it is kind of bothering you that they don't sit totally flat, you could sort of top stitch them down as well. But yeah, I think that works well. A nice, quick, easy option. If you don't have an overlocker, the other option that you could do is an overcast stitch on your sewing machine. So on my sewing machine, I've got this foot here, which is the overcast foot, and this little bar here basically helps the stitching to sort of stay, it keeps it under sort of tension as it's getting stitched. And it kind of gives like a sort of similar effect to overlocking. You can either use it with just a wide zigzag stitch, or some machines do have like specific overcast type stitches. So I've done a variety on these little samples here. I think it works quite well. You have to do it with the non-furry side facing up, because if you overcast it with this side facing up, it's like really hard to see the edge of the fabric because the fluffiness is there. So yeah, I would suggest doing it with this side facing up, and you want to get the bar right on the edge of that fabric as you sew it. And, you know, I think that works well. It probably doesn't sort of contain the fluff quite as well as the overlocking, but, you know, a good alternative, I would say, if you don't have an overlocker. It's definitely doable. So that is one option. And then the other option that I tried out, which is probably my favourite one, takes a little bit more time and patience, but the result does look really good, is the Hong Kong bound seam. So I have done this on the samples here, and you can see that it looks really nice. So this is where you cut bias strips and you then sew it onto the raw edge. Again, I would recommend doing this before you sew the seam as much as possible. It's just much easier to get into and make it look neater. I did a 3 centimetre wide binding, so I just made my own bias strips, and I do have a separate video that is about making continuous bias binding, which makes a lot of it, which is really handy, so I'll link to that in the description of the video as well. But yeah, for this fabric, I tested it with 3 centimetre wide bias strips, and you basically sew it onto the right side of the fabric with a 0.5 centimetre seam allowance. You press it over and away and like round to the back, round to the furry side, and then you stitch in the ditch here where the binding meets the main fabric, and then it just catches the backing underneath. Now that is just a raw edge there, and that is fine because it's cut in the bias, so it won't fray, and also you can't see it anyway. If you wanted to, you could just hand stitch it down to keep it a little bit flatter if you wanted to on the inside. And you can do that on like hems as well, which looks quite nice too. So say that was like your seam and your hem, you could put it on there as well, which would look really nice. But again, it just spreads the load out a little bit more. I don't think it adds any bulk. I've done it with, that's a Liberty Tana lawn, but you could just use any cotton lawn. So it's not like you're adding in a bulky fabric. I think it looks really nice. It works well. It obviously just takes a lot of time, but it will make the insides of your garment really beautiful if you do that. So that's probably my favourite one. That would be my top recommendation, followed by probably overlocking and pressing the seam allowances open. Or then if you don't have the overlocker, the overcast stitch on the sewing machine. Now, when it comes to fastenings and finishing, I've got 2 sort of trials that I did. So one I did with buttonholes, and the other I did with the Prym anorak snaps. So with the buttonholes, I didn't put any interfacing on. You can't really apply interfacing because the back of the fabric is fur, but also it's fairly sort of sturdy anyway, like it's not really got any give or stretch in it. So that's another reason why I thought I could get away without putting any interfacing on it. So I did buttonholes on my machine. I've got a 1-step buttonhole setting on my machine. I did it in all of them. I would say it worked better in some than others. Probably the bubble cord and the denim, I would say it was fine. Like it worked pretty well on that. I've done it in 2 layers because I'm thinking really if it was a placket or something, then it's likely to be 2 layers of fabric you'd be going through. So I think on both these, absolutely fine. On this one, I felt like the stitches, because sort of sink into the kind of like pill of the fabric, or like the sort of height of the fabric, because it's a bit more lofty. Like there you can almost like not really see the stitches. I did it in a contrast thread just so you could sort of get more of an idea of what the buttonhole was actually looking like. I don't know, I just wasn't really that into it on the variated cord. On this one, this is definitely the thicker one, the plaid one. I found it quite tricky to do it. I think the machine was sort of struggling a little bit more to feed it through. I definitely had to like be on high alert to make sure that the machine kept feeding it through and it wasn't getting stuck on the spot. And then I did also find it quite hard to cut it open. I actually accidentally cut some of the threads when I was cutting this open. So yeah, on this one, I think it is probably the trickiest to do. Definitely just do a test on your machine at home to see what your machine can handle. I've got quite a heavy duty machine, so potentially that sort of helped in making it possible to do it on all of these. Maybe if you've got a kind of lighter weight machine, it might struggle a little bit more. I guess you could try to sort of trim some of the fur away from the back if you knew where your buttonhole was going to be. It would maybe just depend on the sort of order of construction, and if you could like quite accurately mark where your buttonholes were going to be before you did that, because you would, that would kind of be on the inside. But I think that would help, like if you just, you used some scissors and just cut away some of the fur on where the buttonhole would end up being. I think that would make it a lot easier. The other option is that you use the anorak snaps. So this is what they look like here. They come in a pack from Prym, so they've got that lovely sort of brass finish on them. You can use, there's a few different ways that you can apply these to your projects. Traditional, more sort of basic way with this purple clip that comes with them and a hammer. You can use the Prym Vario pliers, or you can use the Prym Creative tool. So in all of my experiments, I used my Prym Vario pliers, and I found that this gave me quite a lot of control, because you can kind of, as you're sort of closing the pliers, you can do it gently just to feel that the two sides of it are engaged before you give it a good squeeze. I think you probably could achieve something similar with the Creative tool, but yeah, I found that I got on okay with the pliers. Now, the one thing that I will say with all of these, it worked on all of them. I've done it on all of them, and it's been fine. It was trickier on some than others, but I managed to get the snaps on all of the fabrics, and it is okay. One thing that I did notice as I was doing it, I used a hole punch to make the hole for it as well, is that you kind of need to make the hole and then immediately put the snap in, because it's fluffy. The hole disappears quite easily if you don't put something in it straight away. So yeah, watch out for that. Like, don't be tempted to kind of mark all your holes and then do all your snaps, because you're going to lose track of your holes. The other thing that you really need to do is just kind of make sure that you're sort of really kind of squishing it down. So when I did this side with the sort of, the outer kind of smoother side, you really have to kind of sort of look and feel to see that the little ring is coming through the other side of the snap, and then get the pliers into position and sort of wait for it to engage and then squeeze it down. When I did this side, the male side, I put the backing part in the little sort of plastic clip, and then I pushed that through the hole, put the other bit on top, and then again you sort of slowly close the pliers to engage them before then giving it a really good squeeze. And you can see on that one, it's almost like kind of hiding within the sort of furriness of the fabric again. But they do all open and close fine. I mean, I did get them on. I just wanted to sort of warn you that it is kind of tricky, but it is doable. So you just sort of have to prepare yourself for that. The other option would be, is if you didn't want to do either of them, is that you could just do sew-on snaps as well. So we've got quite a few sort of larger sized ones, which I think would be suitable depending on what you're making. The 30mm ones are obviously like much sort of bigger and chunkier, and then we've got these ones here which are still quite big, but not quite as big as the other ones. So you're just hand sewing them on. So obviously that you'd have like a little bit more control in that. That would definitely be, you'd absolutely be able to put them on, no problem at all. And if you still wanted the effect of a button, you could sew them on, and then just put a button on. Sew a button on, so it's just basically like a decorative button. If you still wanted the effect of buttons without the actual buttonholes, that is another option as well. So I hope you have found that useful, just to kind of narrow down what some of the options are for those fur-backed fabrics. They are so lovely and so cozy. They make gorgeous garments. I've seen loads of lovely samples made up on social media. So hopefully that's given you the confidence to give it a try. Then if we move on to the marled knitted fabric, so I have made a true bias marled cardigan in this. I love it, it's so cozy. But lots of the other staff in the shop have made different garments with it as well. It looks really nice as like a sort of sweater vest. Hannah's made a really lovely Nora, telling the buttons Nora top out of it. I can't remember what pattern it was that was the vest that someone made, but yeah, it's really good for that kind of thing. Probably I would say best for layering, just because it is a more sort of open weave knitted fabric, so it is like a little bit see-through. I don't think you would wear that just on its own, you know, you'd layer it over another t-shirt or top or something. But because it is quite a sort of loose kind of knitted weave, it is good to just think about how you're going to sew it together and how you're finishing off the seam allowances as well. So I would say my top preference for this is an overlocker, and an overlocker just to sew the seam as well. So you just sew it and you finish off the seam allowances all at once with the overlocker. Just have a little look at what your differential feed is. You might have to turn it up a little bit just to stop the seam from going wavy and stretching out. So do some tests on a scrap bit of fabric. It definitely works better with both layers together. I did overlock just a single layer, and I don't know, it just feels like it's a little bit heavier on a single layer, but I was struggling to think of an instance where you would do that, because I think the fabric's thin enough that any sort of seam allowance could be finished off together anyway. If there was any parts of construction maybe where you wanted to sew on a sewing machine first, just so you like had that confidence, you could do that. You could use the stretchy Mariflex thread first on the sewing machine and just a regular straight stitch, and then to sew the seam and then finish it off with the overlocker. But otherwise, like when I made my Marlowe, I just totally sewed it on the overlocker. The seams I didn't do it on the sewing machine first. If you don't have an overlocker, then I would say my top recommendation would be is to sew the seam first with a Mariflex thread and a regular straight stitch, and then finish off the seam allowances together using the overcast foot that I showed you earlier as well. So this is where that little bar sort of tensions the fabric, and you line it up right with the edge of the fabric as you're sewing it. You can do it with either a wide zigzag stitch, or if your machine's got special overcast stitches, then you can use that too. You can see it has made the seam like a little bit wavy when I did this, and it is a bit harder to control that on the sewing machine. Obviously on the overlocker you've got the differential feed which you can tweak and adjust to stop that from happening, but it's harder on a sewing machine, and it doesn't sort of quite contain the seam allowances, the raw edge, quite as much as the overlocker. But I would say it's still a decent alternative if you don't have an overlocker. Obviously you're just sewing the seam first, you know, you can't just do the overcast stitch on the sewing machine like you can just do the overlocker. You do actually have to sew the seam as well. Then in terms of the buttonholes, I found that my machine managed buttonholes on it really easily. I put the really lightweight woven interfacing in it when I made my Marlowe. This is a section of it here, so this is the iron-on stuff. It's really lightweight, it's really thin, but it's just going to help to stabilise the fabric a little bit and make the buttonhole a bit more secure. But I found that it feeded it in fine. It stitches a decent buttonhole. Just keep an eye on it. Just make sure that the fabric's always moving through the machine when you do the buttonhole as well. You know, a little practice can be good just to get used to how your machine's going to handle it. But yeah, I felt that worked. That worked totally fine on my Marlowe when I made it. If you were worried about doing the buttonholes, or you weren't confident that your machine could handle it, again, you could go for the press snaps instead, and just hand sew them on. And you could do the sort of faux button where you just sew a button on for effect, but then behind it has got the press snaps if you weren't sure about actually making a buttonhole in it as well. So it's just another good alternative there. But I hope you found that useful. It's just given you some ideas of things that you can try. I've totally loved playing with all these fabrics and trying out all the different techniques. So I would encourage you to do the same. If you ever get a fabric and you're not quite sure how to handle it, take the pressure off working on it in the context of a project. Get some offcuts and just have a little test of a few different things on some samples, and it can be a really good way to find out how the fabric and your machine are sort of working together and what is going to be best for your project. So thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, then just remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on my next video. Any questions at all, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, or you can call or email the shop as well. The G&G team and I are always more than happy to help. And I will see you next time. Bye!